Welcome everybody to our CCNA kickoff for April of 2018. Glad that you were able to join us today. My name is Keith Bogart. In the event that you have not ever seen any videos of mine or anything, let me just bring up my information right here. And this is also so that at the end of today's show, if you've submitted any questions and for some reason you did not get an answer to your questions, think of me as a resource for you. So as you pursue your CCNA routing and switching, I would love to be able to help you out with that in any way that I can. So you can see here my email address, my Twitter handle, and my LinkedIn connection information. So feel free to reach out to me in any one of those ways. So let me start just by talking a little bit briefly about what the objectives are of our session today, just to set your expectations appropriately. So what are we going to talk about? So over the course of the next hour to maybe 2 hours, I'm going to talk about the testing experience. When you go take your CCNA, I'm going to give you some ideas as to how to answer the questions of what am I going to be tested on? What subjects or topics do I need to study? Do I need to know in order to pass my CCNA exam? I'm going to help you identify some common pitfalls, some things that sort of derail people during their studying process and ultimately cause them to fail when they take their CCNA exam. And then also I'm going to help you, and my objective is to help you through the studying process as well, give you some tips so when you're studying you can make most effective use of that time. So let me just quickly talk about the ideal learner for today's class. So this session is really geared towards people who have just started out investigating the Cisco CCNA exam. Somebody who is thinking, well, you know, this idea of working in some job related to computer networking sounds interesting. It might give me a pay raise, or, you know, whatever your motivations are, you decide that you want to move into the field of computer networking. And through your studies and research and everything, you've discovered that getting your Cisco CCNA is probably the first step along the lines of that path. But you don't really know what the CCNA entails. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. What do you need to learn? How long is it going to take you? What does the actual exam look like when you sit down and take it? You know, what format are the questions going to be in? How much time are you going to be given? What studying resources are available to you? So this course is for somebody like that, to answer those questions so that hopefully by the time I'm done talking today, you'll feel a lot more confident about going in and preparing your journey to eventually get your Cisco CCNA exam. So this is being done via YouTube Live. As clearly you can tell, there is the opportunity there for you to submit your questions to me. So let me talk a little bit about how I'm going to approach that, because there's a lot of people logged in right now, and so I've sort of broken up my presentation here into little snippets of anywhere from like maybe 10 to 20 minutes in length. And at the end of each snippet, then I'll go into the YouTube and take a look and see if there's any unanswered questions, and I'll answer your question right then and there. But by all means, feel free to post your question at any point in time while I'm teaching. There's a lot of people who are watching right now who already have achieved their CCNA, who will be able to answer their question even before I get to it during my various Q&A sessions here throughout the day. So there's a lot of people here who are resources for you in addition to me. I'm not your only resource. So, by the way, for those of you who are watching right now who already have your CCNA, I thank you in advance for being a resource and for helping those people out who are going to be submitting questions for which you may have the answer. So that being the case, let's go ahead and start out by talking about what I call the testing experience. So let's start out by answering the question, how do I get my CCNA? Well, the CCNA certification exam, so if you're brand new to this, Cisco has lots of certification exams starting out at entry level and going all the way up to something called an architect, which like 11 people in the whole world have that one. So that's like a very lofty dream or goal to possibly get that. But what we're talking about here is starting out at the entry level certification. And to get that CCNA, you have a choice. You can take one test or two tests. Now you might be asking yourself, well, if I have a choice, why wouldn't I always just go for a single test? It seems like a no-brainer to me. Well, there's some very good reasons for that. So first of all, here I've put the exam numbers. You've got ICND1, ICND2. So those are the two separate exams, and if you pass both of those, you get your CCNA number, your CCNA credentials, or you can take and you can pass what's called the accelerated exam, which is the 200-125 exam. So let's talk a little bit about these. And by the way, you can see these, and I'm going to refer to this website a lot. So if you go to Google and you just type Cisco CCNA, and this is a good one right here, CCNA Routing and Switching, Cisco. So if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see here are your required exams. Like it says, you can take the accelerated exam, the 200-125, or you can take the two separate exams. All right, so let's speak to this question of why would I take two exams versus one exam? As we go throughout this and I show you various study techniques and various resources available to you, you'll see that pretty much all Cisco exams, virtually all of them, have a book that's been written to go along with the exam. Cisco actually has their own publishing house, their own publishing company called Cisco Press. It's actually a subdivision of O'Reilly Books, I believe. And Cisco Press authors are people who work at Cisco, maybe people who work external to Cisco, but basically it's monitored and managed by Cisco systems. And so whenever you're pursuing a certification exam, there are books that come out to help you with your studying effort. So the ICND1 official certification guide, so that's one book, is literally about that big. It's about 500 or 600 pages big. It's a monstrous book. The ICND2 book is also really big. So you're talking well over 1,000 pages of stuff that you'd have to memorize, which dovetails into my question, why take one test versus two? So if you have been working in the computer networking industry already for, I would say, a minimum of 9 months, absolute minimum of 9 months. So you're already familiar with some of the concepts like IP addressing, you're already familiar with Ethernet, you're already familiar with some WAN technologies, with the basics of routing and switching. If you already have that experience of at least 9 months of employment in that field, then you might consider taking the accelerated exam, the 200-125. Now, as I was just talking right now, if you were listening to me, you were saying, what the heck is he talking about? He just spit out a whole bunch of terms I've never heard of before. Ethernet, IP, WAN, what is that? So if that describes you, you probably do not want to take the accelerated exam. So for people who are brand new to the world of computer networking, maybe you are a software developer. You're really smart with like C++ or PHP or Java or something, but when it comes to actual networking, you have no clue what's going on behind your computer, how your computer connects to the server you're programming on or anything else. Then you're going to want to take the two separate exams, the ICND1 and the ICND2. So really it boils down to experience. If you're brand new to this world and you're just getting your feet wet, I would say start by studying for the ICND1 exam, pass that, and then study for the ICND2 exam and pass that. The accelerated, really for people who've already been in the networking industry for a little bit of time, already have some information under their belt. So what the accelerated exam is, the ICND1 and the ICND2 both have really large question pools. So when you go take the exam, let's just focus on ICND1 for a moment. You'll be given, 50 or 55 questions, something like that. But those 50 or 55 questions are coming from a massive pool of hundreds of questions. And there's another massive pool of hundreds of questions that they draw from for the ICND2 exam. When you take the accelerated exam, you're basically getting questions from both of those question pools in one test. So I think I've said enough about that. So it's your choice which one you want to go, but most people will probably take the two separate exams, the ICND1 followed by the ICND2. And yes, you will want to take them in that order. It doesn't make any sense to take ICND2 first and then study for ICND1. One first, followed by two. Now another common question that I frequently get is, okay, if I decide to do that, how long can I expect to study? How long is it going to take me? That is a very subjective question. You know, this is a test that's really testing your memorization, right? That's what it's really boiling down to, testing your ability to recall facts, how things work, to recall commands that you would enter on a router or switch. It's all memorization based. So how long it's going to take you to prepare really boils down to how well do you memorize things. You know, if you're one of these people that has a photographic memory, very few of you are, but if you're into that category, yeah, you might actually be able to prepare for the ICND1 in like 6 or 7 weeks. But for most people, this is what I tell them. I usually recommend that if during the work week, Monday through Friday, if you can devote a minimum of 2 hours a day, Monday through Friday. It doesn't have to be 2 hours consecutive, but 2 hours throughout the day, Monday through Friday. And then on Saturday and Sunday, if you can devote a minimum of 4 hours each day. All right, so that's 10 hours during the week, plus another 8 hours, so a minimum of 18 hours a week, bare minimum. And if you can do that consistently, week after week after week, most people with that type of study schedule are usually ready to take their ICND1 exam somewhere at the end of 3 months or at the end of 4 months. Somewhere between 3 and 4 months, you should be ready to take and pass your ICND1. Same thing with ICND2. After you pass your ICND1, another 3 to 4 months, maybe 5 months after that, you should be able to take the ICND2 exam. So clearly, the more you study, that'll shave off that time, and the less you study, that will increase that time. Now, that's very loose guidelines. Like I said, a lot of it depends on your ability to memorize things and recall facts, so that should play into it as well. So while I'm here on this website, I want to show you how to actually register for this. So now we're skipping ahead. We're going like 4 or 5 months into the future. You've been doing your preparations, you've been doing your practice exams, you've been doing your studying, and you think, okay, I'm ready to schedule my ICND1 exam and go give it my best shot. How would you do that? Starting from this page, remember, how did I get here? I just went to Google and I typed in Cisco CCNA, and I got here. So for the ICND1, you would click on the exam itself. So there it is, and we're going to look at a lot of stuff on this page as we go along, but specifically what I want you to focus in on is up here where it says register at Pearson VUE. Now, what is Pearson VUE? So Pearson VUE is a company that administers tests of all different kinds, not just Cisco tests. They administer hundreds of tests from various different companies and manufacturers and things like that. And they have locations all over the world, thousands of locations all over the world. So you have to sort of register yourself with Pearson VUE, and that's a free process. And then once you go into Pearson VUE, you register for the exam, you find a Pearson VUE location that's close to you, and then you drive there and you take the test. So let's walk through that process. So here I would click on register at Pearson VUE. If you haven't already registered, you would create an account. Now I've already done that, so I'm going to skip that. I would click on sign in. Okay, and from the exam catalog, you're going to be looking for proctored exams. A proctored exam simply means this is the type of exam where you actually physically drive or take the train or the bus or something to a Pearson VUE location. You sign in, they sit you in front of one of their computers, you have a defined time frame to take the test, and then once you take the test, it automatically grades you and you get your score right then and there. So that's what they mean by a proctored exam. It's not something you do at your own leisure from your own laptop. So we're going to click on proctored exams. And we're talking about the ICND1, so that's the 100-105. There it is. So I'll just click this first one here. Go. All right, select your language. Now, one thing I also want to mention here while we're talking about this, the language thing. Each one of these exams, ICND1, ICND2, and everything else in between, has a certain time limit in which to take the exam. And I'll show you what that time limit here is in just a moment. I believe it's like 90 minutes for the ICND1 and the ICND2. Now, if you happen to live in a country that is a non-native English-speaking country, like let's say you live in Portugal, or you live in India, or Russia, or something like that, unfortunately, these are your only three options. As you can see, Arabic, English, and Japanese. But what's nice is that when you register for this exam, remember, you created your account with Pearson VUE, and as part of creating your account, you said what your address was, your home address. And so if they recognize that that home address is in a non-English speaking, or I should say a non-native English speaking country, they will actually give you an additional 30 minutes to take the exam. So whereas here in the United States, you might only be given 90 minutes to take the exam, if you take it in Russia, or if you take it in India or something like that, you'll get 120 minutes to take the exam. So just be aware of that. That's a little extra grace period that Cisco gives you right there. So I'm going to click on Next right here. All right, and you can see here that currently the price of the exam, I'll go ahead and zoom in on this so you can see a little bit better, is $165 US. Another question I sometimes get from people is, well, if I fail it and I have to retake the exam, do I get a discount? No, you do not. So it's going to be $165 every single time you take it. So I'm going to schedule this exam. Oh, and also while I'm talking about money, another question I sometimes get from people is, well, is it going to cost me less if I take the one CCNA accelerated exam as opposed to taking the two separate exams? Yes, by about $5. So each of the ICND1 and ICND2 is $165 US. So the CCNA accelerated is something like $320 or $330. It's like $5 less than taking the two exams separately. So you're not really going to save yourself anything. So it's not a financial incentive to take the one test as opposed to the two tests. All right, so here we're going to agree to Cisco's non-disclosure agreement, basically promising that we will not tell anybody anything that we saw in the exam, what the specific questions were, what the specific answers were. We're going to keep all that to ourselves. All right, and here you would put in your address. So I'll put in my address here at I&E, search, and it will show you all the Pearson VUE locations that are within your area. Now, I recognize that unfortunately, some of you guys who are watching me today live in areas where the closest Pearson VUE might be quite a ways from where you live. And I'm sorry about that. That's just the unfortunate reality, is that this test must be administered at a Pearson VUE location. So let's say I'm going to click on this first one right here, 3.3 miles away. And now I get to select when I want to take it. So for this one here, I could take it as soon as tomorrow if I wanted to, April 6th. And it shows me what time slots are available. So apparently the morning is all taken up and I could take it sometime in the afternoon. I'll take it at 1 o'clock. All right, now this is as far as I can go because at this point I had to type in a credit card if I want to go any further. But you can see it. I've scheduled my exam. I've got the date and the time, and it's ready for me to move forward and press proceed to checkout, which I am not going to do. Also, a little word of warning right here. I don't know if it mentions it anywhere on this page. No, it must have mentioned it earlier. But if you schedule your exam, at that point, you can't change it. So if something came up and you said, oh, I forgot I was supposed to get married on that day, I should probably reschedule it, that $165 is gone. You have paid Pearson VUE and they have paid Cisco. Can't really get that money back. So be very careful and thoughtful about what date and time you select for taking your exam. Another helpful little tip. I don't know if you're like me. Some of you probably are, in that, you know, if let's say lunchtime rolls around and I haven't eaten yet, after a certain point of time, you know, if I go like 5, 6, 7 hours without eating something, I start getting a little shaky. I can't really think straight. I can't focus. Bad time to sit down and take your CCNA exam. So why do I say that? Well, if you're going to schedule an exam for like noon, make sure you eat something before you go in there. You don't want to have a hypoglycemic attack or something, just completely zone out and be able to focus on the 90 minutes you have to take the exam. You can't take any food in there. You can't take any snacks in there with you. So just be aware that just make sure you're fed. You know, don't eat a big bowl of spaghetti that's going to make you like totally zone out and fall asleep. But just be aware of like practical things like that when you go in to take the exam. All right, so that covers the concept of one exam versus two. I've talked about how to schedule those exams. We've walked through that. So now let's talk about the actual testing experience. You're walking into a Pearson VUE testing center. What should you expect? All right. So when you walk into a testing center, you're going to have to sign in. And after you sign in, they are going to take pretty much everything from you except for the clothes on your back. They're going to take from you your wallet. They're going to take from you your keys. They're going to take from you your cell phone, your watch, everything you have that could possibly in any way be used for cheating. And they're going to take that stuff and they're going to lock it away. Now, in some testing centers I've been to, they actually have lockers on the wall. And you can pick a locker, you put your stuff in there, you lock it up, and then you get to take the key with you. Other places I've been to, they basically take the stuff from you, they pull out a drawer, they put the stuff in a little cubby hole there in the drawer, they close it, and they lock it. But either way, just be aware, you can't take anything with you into the testing center. So if you brought a tablet or a smartphone or something, you might just want to leave that locked away in your car if you feel a little uncomfortable about giving that to a stranger who's going to lock that away somewhere in their desk. Sometimes people mistakenly think, oh, I can take a calculator into the exam. No, you cannot. As you start studying for your CCNA, you will find that there are things that you have to learn how to do that require you to do mental calculations in your mind. For example, binary math, hexadecimal math, subnetting. A lot of that stuff you can do very easily using a calculator, but when you go take the exam, there are no calculators allowed into the exam. On the PC that they're going to sit you down in front of, there's no calculators on that either. So you have to be able to do everything from your head, from memorization, when you go take the exam. So you're going to sign in, you're going to give them pretty much everything except the clothes on your back, they're going to lock it away, and what they're going to give you is they're going to give you like an 11 by 17 laminated, basically piece of paper, one or two dry erase markers, a dry eraser, and some earplugs. And that's what you're going to get. So you're going to walk in there, they're going to open up a door, they're going to walk you into a room with a whole bunch of cubes and a bunch of PCs in there. They're going to sit down, they're going to log in. They're going to log in for you to the exam. And then they'll say, good luck, with a smirk on their face. They'll walk away and they'll shut the door. And you'll notice the cameras, the video cameras on the ceiling, they're watching you. Once again, to prevent you from cheating, to prevent you from taking out your own camera and videotaping the exam. So now you're sitting in front of the computer. The laminated piece of paper is there for you as a resource. If you want to do like a brain dump, like if you've memorized some sort of chart that helps you as a memory mnemonic for, you know, the OSI model or IP addressing or something like that, you can do that. The timer has not started yet. So that 90-minute timer you get for the exam does not start until you press the start button on your computer or the, you know, continue button or whatever it is. So you do have a few minutes up front that you can collect your thoughts. You can do a little brain dump there on that laminated piece of paper and write some stuff down if that will help you. And then you're going to press the start button. First thing you'll see is a demonstration of what the questions are going to look like, what the format of the questions are. And that's going to be the next thing we're going to talk about here in just a second. So you can elect to go through that if you wish. Then you're going to press the start button for the actual exam, and you will have 90 minutes. You can't stop that clock. You can't pause that clock. If you need to run to the restroom or something, those minutes are just going to count on down. So make sure you've done all that before you've actually walked into the testing center. And then once the 90 minutes is done, you will know exactly how well you did once the exam is finished. So that leads to the next question. What is the format of the test questions? Let me show you. Cisco had this nice video on their site. Whoa, what is that? I don't know what that is. Okay, let's start it up. There we go. All right, so some of the questions are multiple choice single answer. I would say many of the questions are multiple choice single answer. And then some of them are multiple choice multiple answer. I'm going to pause this here for just a second, this video. Notice in the video it says choose 3. And that's actually what you'll see. So if there's a multiple choice multiple answer question, you don't have to guess about how many answers are correct. It'll say choose 2, choose 3. And I would say that probably 85% of all the questions you get on the exam will be one of these two types, either multiple choice single answer or multiple choice multiple answer. What are the remaining 15% of the questions going to look like? Well, let me press play here and we'll go through that. Drag and drop questions. You'll see a few of these, not a whole lot. You might just see one. I think at the most I've seen like 4 drag and drop questions, so you're not going to get a lot of these, but just be aware that they do exist. The next question type, fill in the blank. I have never seen any of these. Apparently the testing engine does have them as a potential question, but I've taken the CCNA quite frequently and I can't recall ever seeing a fill in the blank question. All right, so let's talk about this one, the router simulation. So when you take the CCNA exam, they are testing you on sort of 2 high-level things. Concepts like, do you understand what this feature does? Do you understand in this particular protocol what happens when A, B, and C happens, what's going to happen next? What trigger causes this to happen? So all sorts of theoretical things, you're going to be tested on that. The other thing you're going to be tested on is actual implementation of those concepts on Cisco routers and switches. Specifically, do you know what the commands are to type in a router or switch to get this feature to do what you want it to do? Now, how exactly do they test you on Cisco iOS commands? How do they test you on that? Well, certainly you could get multiple choice questions on that. You could get a question that says, of the commands below, which is the correct command to accomplish the following objective? And then it'll give you like 5 questions, each 5 answers. Each one has what looks like a Cisco iOS command, and you have to identify the correct command to do the following. Or they might say, given this topology diagram, they'll show you a picture of a bunch of routers and switches. If you typed in this particular command on this particular device, which of the answers below correctly identifies what would be the result? What would happen? So those are some ways, given multiple choice questions, how they might test you on your knowledge and memorization of Cisco iOS commands. The other way is what you see right here, the router simulation. So when you get a router simulation question, the format's going to look just like this. So up at the top, let's bring this back here. Sorry about that, guys. I lost the video, but I can get it back. Skip forward, skip forward, skip forward. All right. So here in the router simulation, what you'll see here up at the top, this here will give you a description of what you need to accomplish. So this is where your objective will be. And you'll just read through that and it'll tell you what you need to do. You need to configure this. You need to make this work. So that's where that will take place. This section right here just basically tells you sort of how to walk through, how to work the simulation. But by the time you're done listening to me, you'll already know how to do that. And so this right here is the actual simulation window. Now let me back up a little bit, just a second here, 10 seconds back. Okay, so when you get the simulation, you will get some sort of topology diagram, like you see right here. So you have to read what the objective is that they want you to do, and you have to think, okay, based on what they want me to do, which of these devices do I have to log into to change or configure something? So let's say you decide, okay, well, through my knowledge of networking, what I've been studying, I believe that what I need to do is get into this router right here, and I need to configure something. So you can see, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to click on this host, and by clicking on that host, you will get the command line, or I would say the screen that gives you the ability to type in commands into that router, which will look like this. So you click on that host, and then here you have a simulated terminal. So now in here, you're going to be sort of typing in the commands into the router to get it to do what you want to do. Now, this is a simulator. This is not real Cisco software. In other words, it's not the real Cisco software that's running on real routers. It's simulated software that's meant to look and feel like that. Why do we care? What's the difference? Well, a couple things. Number one, as you are learning how to configure things, there's a lot of times when to accomplish a particular objective, there's more than one way to do it. There's multiple Cisco iOS commands that will do what you want this router or switch to do. Now, if this was real Cisco iOS, you'd have all of those commands available to you. But because this is a simulation, certain commands will not be available to you. So as you're learning about this stuff, you want to make sure that if there's more than one way to learn how to do something, to learn how to get a router to do something, you want to learn what all those potential ways are, because you don't know which specific method is going to be available to you here within the simulation, because not all the commands are going to be available. Secondly, as you're working with Cisco iOS, there are certain shortcuts that you can use and help features. For example, when you're logged into a router, let me expand this a little bit right here. All right, so when you're logged into a router and you get this prompt right here, if you just type a question mark, the question mark on your keyboard, in real iOS, you will see a listing of all the commands that are available at that particular level. Wherever you are right there, all the commands are available. Well, in the simulation mode, the question mark is available, but you won't see all the commands that you would normally see in real Cisco iOS. You'll just see a subset of those commands. A lot of the other useful features that you'll learn as you start working with Cisco iOS are also available in here. But the main point is, this is a real good way here to test your ability to see, do you actually know how to configure these things? Do you know the actual Cisco iOS commands to get something done? Now, one thing, a couple more things about this. As I mentioned, you've only got a specific amount of time to accomplish this test. You've got 90 minutes to go through all the questions. A router simulation could very easily burn up a lot of time if you're not careful. Some router simulations, if you go into it without even thinking about it, you could look at the clock and like 6 or 7 minutes have been burned away already. So be very conscious of your time when you're going through the router simulation. You don't want to waste too much time on these things. Secondly, a lot of people have asked the question, when I'm doing a router simulation, is there partial credit available? In other words, for example, when you're configuring a Cisco router or Cisco switch, once you have typed in the commands to get the router switch to do what you want to do, a very common thing that people do as the very last command they type is a command to save the configuration, to save those changes they've just made. Well, sometimes people wonder, well, hey, if I got the router to do what it's supposed to do, according to the objective, but I forgot to save my configuration, am I going to lose credit? Am I going to lose all the points for that question? Or if I did some of the objective, but I just couldn't remember what the commands were to do all of the objective, do I get partial credit? The true answer to that is nobody knows. That's the real answer. Now, on some of the other on some of the other higher exams, for example, once you get to the CCNP level, which are the intermediate exams. For example, the CCNP route switch, which is a level up from CCNA, when you start out by taking that, it'll actually tell you at the very beginning that there is partial credit. Some of the questions do allow partial credit. CCNA, I don't recall it saying that. So there's really no way to know on a simulation how many points you're given, or if there's partial credit given. Cisco keeps that information very tightly secret to their own vest. They don't let anybody know that. I worked at Cisco for 17 years, and while I was working at Cisco, even then as an internal employee, we did not know how the scoring worked on these exams. Is this particular router simulation worth 1 point, 6 points? Is partial credit available? Nobody knew except for the designers and implementers of this test. So it's just unknown. So that's the router simulation. You won't get too many of those. Sometimes when I've taken the CCNA, I've only gotten one router simulation. Other times I've gotten, I think, a maximum of like 4 router simulations. So it'll be somewhere between that, 1 and 4 of these questions. The next question is the testlet. So in the testlet, you are given some information up top, maybe the output of a command, maybe the a scenario or something like that, and based on what you see here, you have to answer 4 multiple choice questions. So I hate the testlet because it's actually like 3 or 4 questions all bundled into one. So you read this, you answer the first multiple choice question based on what you see, and then you move on to the next multiple choice question. And then finally, when you're done with all these, you're done with this particular testlet. This also, you'll get anywhere from maybe 2 to 4 of these in the course of taking your ICND1 or your ICND2 exam. Another thing I should point out, let's say you're on question number 5 and you're reading, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I remember studying this. I studied this technology like 3 months ago and I just don't remember what the answer is to this particular question. All right, I guess I'll just guess it. Answer C looks like it's correct. So you collect that and you move on to question 6 and 7. Now you get to question number 13, and something about question number 13 sparks your memory about question number 5. You're all, oh, now I remember what the answer to question number 5 was. Oh, I answered it wrong. I need to go back. You can't. There's no way to go back. Once you hit submit for a question, you can't go back to a previous question. So just be aware of that. All right, so testlet is done. The simlet. So a simlet is very similar to the router simulation questions in that you get the opportunity to log, or I should say virtually log into a router switch. But here's the difference. In the router configuration simulations, the objective is to log into a router and make it do something that it wasn't doing before. Configure something new, fix something that was broken. That's the objective in that, to type in iOS commands and test your knowledge of what is the command to get it to do something, to get it to fix something. In the simlet, notice here you've got some multiple choice questions up above. So the simlet, the objective is really, once you've logged into a router switch, do you know what the correct command is to monitor something? Not to configure something from scratch, not to fix something, but to, what is the correct command to get the information you're looking for? Like a lot of Cisco iOS commands begin with the word show. Show this, show that. So if you want to monitor how a particular feature is doing or what information a feature has learned, you would type show and then a command. So these simulets are testing your memorization of, do you remember what the appropriate show commands were, so you can get the information you're looking for, so you can answer the multiple choice question. So that's really the difference between a simlet and a router configuration. Both of them sort of look like you're getting into a router switch, but here you're just testing your ability to monitor routers and switches. Like in this case, you're typing the show running config question. And I believe that is it as far as the types of questions that are available. Yep, that's it. Those are the 7 different types. So just to recap, of the 50 to 60 questions you're going to get within your 90 minutes, vast majority of them will be multiple choice. Multiple choice single answer, multiple choice multiple answer. That's, like I said, 85% of the questions. The remaining 15% will fall into configuration simulations, simlets, testlets, and some of those drag and drops. That'll be the remaining few questions that you get right there. And the last thing I want to talk about in this particular section, then I'll get to your questions, is how well did I do? You will know this. So let me go back here to the website we were just looking at, this one right here. So here we go. So the ICND1, and I'm going to focus here on this in just a sec in the next section, but notice it says review the exam topics. This leads you to something called the exam blueprint. If I click on that, so this is the exam blueprint for the ICND1, and you can see it breaks it out into 5 really sort of high-level subjects, and then you can drill down into either one of those, and we'll go into that in more detail coming up. But what I want to point out for right now is once you take your exam and you press submit on the last question, you will immediately see on the screen of your computer how you did. It'll tell you passing score is this, and this is what you got. Either congratulations or I'm sorry you did not pass. But you'll see what your score was immediately. Then when you walk out and you go back to the person who signed you up in the first place, the person who took your keys, so you get your keys back, your wallet back, and all that stuff, they will give you a piece of paper that shows you these subjects. And that piece of paper will say, okay, of networking fundamentals, you got 99% correct. Of LAN switching fundamentals, you got 15% correct. So when you walk away, you're not actually given any paper that says, this is the question you failed, this is the question you got correct. You don't get that granular level of detail, but what you do get is a piece of paper that shows you these high-level categories, and out of 100%, how much you got on each one of those categories. So that'll give you somewhat of an idea as to where you need to continue your studies if you happen to fail the exam. And if you passed it, great. You'll know you passed it, and you'll then have your number. So with that, let me go into YouTube here and see if there are any questions that have been unanswered that I can help you out with. All right, so let me scroll up to the top here. So Varun, you ask a question, you have a doubt about how to do routing with OSPF. That is a huge topic. That's actually worthy of an entire session on its own. So as I go through these questions, what I'm looking for are questions from people about, what's the exam going to look like? How do I study? Or I had a difficulty here. If I'm able to answer all of those, and then we still have some time, I would love to come back and get some more of your technical questions. But the question about OSPF is a really big one. We're going to pause that and see if there's any other sort of more generic questions here. Mr. Fail Standstill, they didn't give any earplugs. Oh, that stinks. They've always given me earplugs. I don't know how you would be able to concentrate in there if you didn't have earplugs. So ask them. I will talk, there's a couple mentions here about Packet Tracer. I will talk about Packet Tracer in just a little bit when I talk about study resources that are available to you. GNS3 will also talk about that. And Maddox12 says, is Packet Tracer still relevant? Absolutely, absolutely. As a matter of fact, when people are studying for their CCNA, I recommend Packet Tracer above everything else. And we'll talk about why. It's free, it's easy to download, and it contains probably 90% or 95% of all the commands you would need to know in order to do labs to practice for your CCNA. Now, once you get beyond the CCNA and you get to like the CCNP level, at that point, packet tracer doesn't work so well. But at the CCNA level, absolutely, packet tracer is a great tool. What books do I recommend? Well, in short, I recommend that you get the Cisco Press books, the official certification guides and the foundation learning guides. And I'll show you what those are, and I'll show you how to get those in just a moment. Are there any other questions? No other questions coming in? Okay. Question, how about jobs? That is a great question. The reality is that if you don't have any networking experience at all and you get your CCNA, it's probably going to be kind of tough to get a job as a network administrator. People who are hiring positions of network administrator is sort of like the entry-level position to work in a computer network. People who are hiring for those types of jobs are typically looking for either people who have a CCNA and experience or people who have at least a CCNP, but ideally they're really looking for people who have some kind of experience, which sort of begs the question, well, how do I get experience if I can't get a job in the field? Usually what I recommend to people is this. If you work at a company, you have a network available to you. You know, even the smallest company has a couple of routers and a switch in their closet somewhere, and they have somebody that installed that and that monitors and manages that. Or if you're at a school, there's a network at your school. And certainly if you work at a larger company, you have a larger network available to you. But I would recommend wherever you are right now, you find the network administrator or the person who's in charge of running and monitoring your company's network or your school's network if you're going to a school. And just simply walk up to them in all humility and say, hey, look, right now I'm studying for my CCNA. I want to be able to eventually do what you're doing. I want to get a job in the field similar to what you're doing. Is there any way I could shadow you? And as you're working on this stuff, you know, I could bounce questions off you. I could see what you could do. I could ask you questions about, you know, why you're doing that, and just see if they will take you under their wing as like their mentor. That is the best way to get some experience without actually getting a paying job as a network administrator. So you'll want to somehow do that in the course of your CCNA studies, so that by the time you start applying for a job as a network administrator, not only can you say, hey, yeah, I've got my CCNA, but also I've been volunteering in this organization, or I've been shadowing alongside this person, I actually have some experience under my belt. Okay, so let's go into our next section, which are the topics. This section is answering the question, how do I know what subjects to study? How do I know what topics I need to research and memorize in order to pass my ICND-1 and my ICND-2 exam? So let's go back to the blueprints to begin with. This is the very first place you want to start for any certification exam. CCNA all the way up to CCIE is finding the blueprint for that particular exam. So once again, how did we find that? Go to Google, type in Cisco CCNA. Go to CCNA routing and switching. And we're just going to focus right now on the ICND 1 exam because that's the exam that probably most of you are going to start with. So you'll click on that. And right here where it says review the exam topics, this will lead you to the blueprint. All right, so here we have the blueprint for the exam. It shows you the high-level topics, and then you can click on show details. And this drills down into the details for that particular level. So anything you see here is a potential testable item. You could get questions on anything that you see in here, any of these levels. So that is your first place. So number one, I would say, see right here, it says download a list of topics in PDF format. I would start with this. I would download the PDF and I would print out a couple of copies of that and have that ready, have that next to you. So now that's the listing of topics. Now the next question you'd probably have is, okay, well, where do I find material to study these topics and how much depth do I need to go into? For example, if I open up one of these, like, how about routing fundamentals? Okay, so if I scroll in here, if I zoom in on this a little bit, notice down here, bullet point 3.7. It reads, configure, verify, and troubleshoot RIP version 2 for IP version 4, excluding this, that, and the other thing. Well, RIP version 2, actually, if you start Googling that, can be a pretty in-depth topic. You can get pretty far into the weeds of the details of how RIP version 2 works, to the point that you could potentially be studying stuff that's not even on the CCNA exam because you've gotten far deeper than you need to go. And certainly when you get into the ICND 2, let's take a look at that. When you look at the blueprint for ICND 2, exam topics for that test, and we go to routing technologies, here you have to learn about even more advanced routing protocols like OSPF and like EIGRP. And once again, if you just went on to Google and you did some Google searches for OSPF, you would start seeing documents on there that have much more complex, much more technical depth than you actually need to learn and memorize to pass the CCNA. So while the blueprints are great for giving you sort of a high-level outline of what the topics are, they don't really do a good job of answering the question, how much depth do I need to go into for any one of these topics right here? So how do you get that? That leads me to my next point, which are the official Cisco Press books. So let's go back to here. So like I mentioned earlier, Cisco has their own publishing company called Cisco Press. And that publishing company has, over the course of the last couple of decades, come up with hundreds of books, not only geared towards Cisco certification tests, but they have books just on particular topics, are really, really deep on like BGP or OSPF or specific Cisco protocols and features. So you're going to want to get your hands on the official certification guidebooks that go with ICND 1 and ICND 2. So first of all, if we go to Amazon.com, we can see here an example of what those books look like. So I'd say Cisco ICND 1. All right, so here's the official ICND 1 certification guidebook. It's actually gone down a little bit in price. Last time I looked at it, it was like $27. Now it looks like it's gone to $20. So $20 for that book. And it's probably about the same for the ICND 2 book. Another useful resource, and this is something I actually love to use, and thankfully because I work at I&E, I get access to this, but there is a resource called Safari Books Online. And this is a subscription-based service. This is not sponsored by INE or anything, so we don't get anything for this, whether you sign up for Safari or not. But with Safari, if you sign up for this, and you can pay, I think, like monthly, you can pay for a 6-month subscription or a 1-year subscription, you actually get access to thousands of technical books online, and all the Cisco Press books are also in here. So from here I could type Cisco ICND 1 official. And here's the ICND 1 official certification guidebook. And if there's more than one, I would look for the one with the latest release date. So for example, here's one right here. Here's the academic edition that was released a year ago, April of 2017. It looks like that is the most recent edition of this book. So this is the same book that you would get. Actually, it looks like this is a bunch of supplemental videos, so this is probably not what I want. Let's just go with the older one from 2013. This is the same thing you would get if you bought this from Amazon or something. Viewing table of contents. Now, hold on a second. This looks like this is also a bunch of videos. I suppose I need to find one that does not have that video icon in the image. All right, this one right here. There we go. All right, so here's our table of contents. So this is the entire book. You can read online, so it's your choice. You could purchase the book through Amazon or something else, or you could get a subscription to Safari Online Books and read it online. But, you know, if I was asking myself the question, okay, let's see here, let's find some topic. Let's scroll down a little bit. So I saw in the blueprint there was a topic on learning IPv4 routes with OSPF version 2. Now, wait a second, is this ICND 2 or ICND 1? This says ICND 1 Official Certification Guide, and yet, if I was not mistaken, the ICND 1 blueprint did not mention anything about OSPF, and I'm fairly certain that OSPF is only in the ICND 2 exam. This is probably because this book is old. This is actually a good opportunity. So the CCNA exam, so all Cisco certification exams are updated and reviewed about every 4 years or so. So the last time the CCNA, the ICND 1 and the ICND 2 exams were updated, I believe was in 2016. And I think the mistake that I made was that this book, this book was made in 2013. So I don't want to look at that. I want to look at a book that is from at least 2016. So let's see here. All right, this is the one we want. Let me zoom in on this. So here we go. The official Cisco Press book, and published May of 2016 for the ICND 1. So this will cover the most recent iteration of these tests. So we're going to click on this. We're going to view the table of contents. And okay, and let's say that as I'm reading the blueprint on Cisco's website, so here we are with the ICND 1. Let's go back to the blueprint. And here in the blueprint, under Routing Fundamentals, one of the things it's talking about is verifying and troubleshooting IPv4 static routing. I say, okay, well, how much level of detail do I need to know about static routing? So I go to the book here, and in this particular section under IPv6, implementing IPv6 routing. Sorry guys and gals, their website is a little slow today. So let's skip past the quiz. Let's just scroll down. So the general idea here is that whatever level of depth or detail that you see in these books, that is the appropriate level of depth or detail that you want to study. So if you just Googled a particular topic, like I said, you might end up reading about something that's way more than the CCNA would expect you to learn. But if you're looking through the official certification guidebook for ICND 1 and then later on for ICND 2, these are written specifically to help people learn what they need to learn to pass their ICND 1 and their ICND 2 exams. So the level of depth that's appropriate will be contained here in these books. Now there are other books as well. You know, Cisco Press is not the only one that comes out with books to help you pass your CCNA. If you just Google Cisco CCNA on Amazon, you'll see books from all kinds of authors. Many of them are very good. Many of them are written in a style that's engaging, has great quiz questions, great graphics and stuff. But here's the thing that gives me pause when I'm thinking about those books. I know that Cisco Press books, whether they were written by Cisco employees or people who are not Cisco employees, either way, it had to go through an editing process and a review by Cisco. These are books that are actually officially blessed by Cisco. People at Cisco had to read them and say, yes, this is what we want. This will help prepare people for the CCNA or the CCNP or the CCIE. So if I'm reading somebody else's book that's not Cisco Press, it has not gone through that vetting process. So with a Cisco Press book, at least I have those sort of warm fuzzies that I know that people at Cisco who've actually designed and implemented the exams have looked at these books and they have given it their blessing and it has gone out. The other books, I don't know. So just because a book that's a non-Cisco Press book might cover the exact same topic, but is it going into the correct depth? Is it too little depth? Is it too much depth? I just have to trust that the author who wrote that book covered it to the sufficient level of what I need to know to pass the exam. Whereas the Cisco Press books, I know it's been vetted and reviewed and edited by an actual board at Cisco Systems, and so it gives me a little bit more confidence, a little bit more security about that. So that's why I typically steer people to these particular books. Now, in addition to reading the books, you might also be one of those many people out there that likes to learn via videos. And of course, hey, we are I&E. That is what our specialty is, in delivering video content to help people learn. So we do have several videos to help you prep and pass your CCNA. So let me just spend a few moments just talking about those in case you weren't aware of what we have. So without being an I&E customer at all, you can still see to a certain level what videos we have available. Let me expand on this here a little bit. So in the URL bar, you can just type streaming.ine.com. Anybody can do this. Don't even need an I&E account. Streaming.ine.com. And it'll take you to this website. So this shows you every single video that we have available. So because we're talking about Cisco, we're going to click over here on Cisco. We're going to click on CCNA. Let me make this a little bit larger here. Okay. And we're talking about routing and switching. So you can see we have several, and these are all video courses that have multiple videos within them. So specifically what I want to point out are this one right here and this one right here. So this is a video series that I created for the ICND 1 exam. This is another video series here I created for the ICND 2 exam. And then for those people who want to take the accelerated exam, all those videos were collapsed and combined into one series, which is what you see right here, the 200-125. So that's nothing different. That's just these two videos, these sets put in together. So if we click on ICND1 technologies, you can see here we've got about roughly 22.5 hours of content for ICND1. You can see the titles of the videos, the duration of the videos. Now, if you don't have an INE account, if you haven't purchased any products from us, this will be about as far as you can go. But at least from streaming.ine.com, you can see the videos we have, their titles and their durations, and you can make an informed selection as to if this is something you think that would actually help you. And I can't speak to other authors who've created videos, but I know myself, when I created these by looking at the blueprint, creating videos that matched what I saw in the Cisco blueprint, and trying to create videos that I felt were the appropriate level of detail and depth that you would need to know to pass the CCNA. Now, in addition to that, many times in my videos, I go a step further and I sort of answer the question, why was this technology created? I help give you a good idea as to what problem is this feature or protocol solving? Why would you use it? Where in a network would you use it? Where it might not be appropriate to use it in a particular network? And I give you some demonstrations and examples of how the protocol or technology actually works. So I think videos are a great supplement to go along with reading of the official certification guidebooks as well. So that should hopefully answer the questions of what topics do I need to study and what level of detail do I need to study those topics. Start with the blueprint. That'll give you the listing of the topics, and then go to the official certification guidebooks and supplement with those with videos to get the appropriate level of depth or detail for those topics. So with that, I think it's time for me to go back into YouTube here and see if there's any unanswered questions. Thrain Daniels, you asked, have I ever done any workbook videos for ICND1? Because I can only find workbook for ICND2 at INE. Now, hold on just a second here because my YouTube is spinning and I want to make sure that, okay, looks like it's just I refreshed it, so we're good to go. Yes, I'm going to talk about the workbooks here in just a second, but to answer your quick question, the ICND2 workbook was a series of videos that I created. ICND1 was not. So no, I don't have any video-based workbook for ICND1. I've only got a video workbook for ICND2. And for those of you who are wondering, what is a workbook? What's he talking about? When I talk more about study resources and things that are available to you to practice, I'll touch on that. I'll touch on what workbooks are, so we'll get to that. Are there going to be any CCNA service provider videos going to be made? Unknown. I don't know. Certainly not by me. That's not my specialty. I don't know if any of our other instructors are going to create CCNA service provider. Let's just see. Let's see if we have anything currently in there. Cisco, CCNA, service provider. So we have some stuff here. Now, I don't know if these are old or not. 640-8 something. Let's go to Google, Cisco, CCNA. Actually, I think it's called, let's see here, service provider. Okay, so it looks like 875 and 878. Yeah, so these are the latest, these are the newest ones, 875 and 878. So we do have two. Rob Riker was the author of these, but we do have two video courses for CCNA service providers. So that does exist. Are there any other questions that I could help you with? Oh, hold on, I got to scroll down a little bit. And yeah, Ryan points out a very good thing. We do have a massive amount of videos, and sometimes knowing, well, what video do I start with? What do I go to next? We do have these things called curated playlists. So for example, CCNA, routing and switching. So if you look up here, let me make this a little bit bigger. If you go on the left and click on this curated playlists, you can see we have curated playlists for like routing and switching, CCNA, CCNP, and other things. If I click on CCNA curated playlist, this is a listing of all the videos that we have that you'd go through that are related to ICND1, ICND2, and I think there's going to be stuff that's added to this list. I recently updated this just a couple of days ago, so expect to see this change over the next couple of days. I think this is a rather old list, but that's what our curated lists are, is just a listing of various videos we have that fall within the realm of CCNA, CCNP, CCIE. So that can be useful to you. I would say check back with that in about a week and a half, and it will most likely change because I have submitted an update request for that just a couple of days ago. Nicholas asks a good question. What would you say is the harder parts, ICND1 or ICND2? I just passed my CCENT. By the way, CCENT is the ICND1. So if you pass the ICND1 exam, you actually have a certification called the Cisco Certified Entry-Level Technician, or the CCENT. And then if you go to pass your ICND2, now you've got your CCNA, just so you know that. I think ICND2, well, let's see here. Which is harder? They're both probably equally difficult. The ICND2 takes some of the concepts you learned at the ICND1 and expands on them, but then there's also a whole bunch of new concepts that you don't even learn until you get to the ICND2. Part of me wants to say that ICND2 is more difficult than ICND1, but I wouldn't say it's a massive amount more difficult than ICND1. They're both very similar in their difficulty level. And a couple people here mentioned that their resume contains only the CCNA routing and switching. Can I find a job? Potentially, yes. But to be honest with you, I think most employers looking to hire people into a networking role these days, there are tens or hundreds of thousands of people that have a CCNA on their resume. So what's really going to set you apart is if you take it to the next level and you get your CCNP. If all you have is a CCNA, it's going to be difficult finding a job. Certainly if all you have is a CCNA without any experience, it'll be really difficult for you to find a job in networking. So I always recommend to people that if possible, you get your CCNP in addition to your CCNA. How long does the CCNA certification stay relevant for? And Mr. Fail Standstill says, yep, 3 years. That is correct. It's good for 3 years. So every 3 years you have to recertify it or it expires. Okay, let's go into our next topic. In this next topic called study tips, I'm going to talk about, what can you do when you're studying to make your studying more effective, more efficient? What resources are available to you? What are all the things that you want to incorporate into your studying time? It's more than just reading a book. What are some other things that you can do? So let's talk about that. So certainly we've already talked about videos, books, and online documents. So I didn't really talk about online documents that much. But, you know, Google is a great resource. Here's the one little tip I would give you for Google. Let's say, for example, that you knew that one of the topics you need to study for, let's say you're studying for your ICD 1, and within the ICD 1 blueprint, there was that topic of RIP version 2. And if you're like me, I learn best if I read about something across multiple different sources. For example, if I was learning about RIP version 2 for the very first time, I would read about it in the official certification guidebook, but for me to make it really stick, I would also watch a video on it, and then I would Google it, and I'd have to read about it from like 4 or 5 different sources before it really gelled and stuck in my mind, and I was able to sort of visualize how this particular thing worked. So here's the thing. In Google, you don't want to just type RIP version 2. If you type that, you're most likely going to get stuff that's going to go way above and beyond what you need to learn for the CCNA level. So anything that you type in here when you're searching for a topic, always make sure to also include CCNA. The topic name, what you're searching for, and CCNA. And that will most likely lead you to websites and documents that will constrain what they're teaching you to a CCNA appropriate level. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that you could also look at as well. Now, I'm also a huge proponent of flashcards. Because remember, after all, what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with a test that's forcing you to memorize lots and lots of information. And just reading through a book, watching dozens of hours of video, how is that going to make that stuff stick in your head? Memorization is all about repetition, repetition, repetition. That's how you memorize something. So I love creating flashcards for this type of thing. Now, when it comes to flashcards, certainly you can purchase flashcards. Cisco Press will be more than happy to sell you a set of pre-made flashcards. I've seen that in the past. I'm sure if you go on Amazon or other websites, people have flashcards they've made that they're willing to sell you. But I think the best way to memorize something is to create your own flashcards. So purchase some, 4x6 or 3x5 blank note cards and have them handy. And as you're reading, make flashcards. As you're watching a video, make a flashcard. If you're watching like a 10 or 15 minute video, you should not be able to get through that 10 or 15 minutes without having created a minimum of 6 or 7 flashcards for yourself. So you should pause frequently and make flashcards. On the front of the card, write yourself a question. On the back of the card, write the answer. And another great thing about flashcards is that, first of all, they're available to you whenever and wherever you are. Now, as far as flashcards are concerned, you can certainly do what I'm suggesting, physical flashcards with pen and paper. There's also online resources like one of them is called Study Blue. And this is a website where you can make online flashcards for yourself. It is absolutely free to do it. Okay, so for here within Study Blue, you can create flashcards yourself, and then you can go in here and test yourself every once in a while. Study now, okay? INE CCNA bootcamp prerequisites. I'm going to go study everything. I'm going to study them in a random order. Study now, and then you can study your own flashcards that you've done right here. And what's also kind of cool about this, so you can say, oh, I got this one wrong. I thought it was the number 19. Okay, thumbs down. Got that one wrong. Okay, which laptop is connected to an Ethernet cable, blah, blah, blah. And okay, great, I got that one right. So as you go through here, you can do your flashcards, answer your questions, finish studying, and it'll actually keep track of how well you're doing. And then one of the things about this website is you can choose just to study the ones you've gotten wrong as opposed to the ones you've gotten right. So this is kind of nice. I personally like actually creating real flashcards on real note cards, and here's the reason why. Because I can take them with me no matter where I am. I can have them with me in a car, right? And when I go up to a red light, take one of my flashcards and just quiz myself out real quickly before the light turns green. When I'm at a restaurant for lunch or dinner or something, I can take that with me. Here, well, I'd have to have my tablet or my smartphone. I'd have to have internet access to make use of these flashcards. So they're not really available everywhere and anywhere I could possibly go. The other nice thing about having real flashcards that you create, now this is of course assuming that your handwriting is legible and other people can read your handwriting, is that you can get your friends and family involved. You can call your wife over and you can say, hey, honey, would you mind just spending the next 15 minutes quizzing me on my flashcards right here? And your wife will love to see you squirm as you get answers incorrect. You can give them to your friends, you can give them to your dog, your cat, just lots of people can help you in your studying efforts. If you have real flashcards, you can hand them and help quiz yourself on that. So I can't emphasize enough, create flashcards for yourself as you're going through your reading, as you're going through your videos. Study with a group if possible. A lot of benefits to this. Number one, a group keeps you accountable. A group keeps your momentum going so you don't get stuck. Ideally, the best study groups are the ones that do keep you accountable. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a lot of online study groups up there. For example, I can go to this, google.com, and I can say Cisco CCNA study group. I can say, oh, great, Cisco themselves, the Learning Network, has a study group. And I can sign up for this. And I can join the discussion. And I can see questions and answers that people have created. But is this keeping me accountable? No. I can go weeks without looking at this thing, and nobody's ever going to notice that I wasn't there. I don't have to contribute anything to this. So the best study groups are, number one, groups that actually keep track of your attendance, where there's like a study group leader or mentor who's keeping track of, okay, Johan wasn't here last week, and now when hey, Johan, how's it going? We didn't see you last week. We missed you. Is there anything we can help you with? You're a slacker. Start showing up. Some study group that will keep a record of your attendance, so there's a little bit of peer pressure there to show up. Another thing about study group is they should force you to participate in some way. For example, a good study group would say something like, okay, if you're going to be a member of this study group, every week we're expecting you to create 3 or 4 quiz questions and answers on whatever the topic is we're studying for this week. And then you have to submit those, electronically via email or something. We do a rotation of where everybody in the group has to teach a topic. So maybe every week we have a quick WebEx section and, hey, Susan, next week you're up. So Susan, next week you need, for 15 minutes, we want you to teach us something on spanning tree. And John, the week after that, you're up. We're going to want you to teach us 15 minutes on EIGRP. So that's keeping people accountable. And by the way, a motto I like to use is, the best way to learn something is to teach it to other people. If you have to create a presentation that you're going to give to 1 or more people, that is the best way to light a fire under you to learn that really well so you can teach it to somebody else. There's no better motivation to learn something really well than if in the back of your head, I'm going to have to teach this to other people in a week or a month or something like that. So that's when I talk about study groups. The best study groups are ones that somehow have accountability built into the study group. Otherwise, you will just drop out and nobody will ever know that you're even there. Refer back to old topics often. So as you do your studies, if you're like 3 months into it and you haven't reviewed the stuff that you learned back in weeks 1 and weeks 5, you're going to forget that stuff. This is another benefit of the flashcards. The flashcards you can always go back to. As a matter of fact, I encourage you to go back to your older flashcards and continually quiz yourself on that older stuff. Also, old topics refers to this as well, lab practice. And now here's where I'm going to talk about GNS3 and Packet Tracer. But before I get into that, hopefully by now I've sort of emphasized to you that to pass your CCNA, you have to have memorized not only the theoretical concepts, how they work, what causes them to break. But you also have to have memorized the Cisco iOS commands to get your routers and switches to implement those concepts. Well, the absolute best way to memorize those commands is to do it, is to get on routers or switches and do lab practice and try to make it work. Try to break it and see what happens when it breaks. When you intentionally break something, is the result what you expected or something a complete surprise to you? Well, how's this referred to old topics? As I'm creating a lab, a lot of times I like to incorporate into my lab not only the new topic I'm studying right now and I'm learning right now, but I like to fold into it something older that I learned way back when. For example, let's say that, I'll do it in like real world experience here. Let's say that I was learning about driving, okay? And one of the first things I learned were the various signs on the roadway. You know, what a stop sign is, what a yield sign is, something like that. Okay, so a lab for that was somebody drove me around in their car and they said, okay, Keith, what's that sign? Oh, that's a yield sign. That means this, this, and this. What's that? Oh, that's a stop sign. That means, so that was my first lab, right? I did that. Now, as I go a little bit further in my studies of driving, I learn about how to drive at excessive rates of speed. You know, what's the difference of how does it look and feel to drive at 25 versus 60 miles an hour? So if I was just going to focus on that, I might, find a particular area of my city or the country or something where I could practice driving at different speeds. Now, when I say here refer back to old topics, in the context of driving, that would mean like, okay, not only do I want to find a part of the city or the countryside where I can practice driving at 25 and 60 and driving around curves at different speeds, but ideally, I'd also like to find an area that has a lot of signs in it. Yield signs, stop signs, school bus crossing signs, stuff like that. So as I'm driving 70 miles an hour, I can say, oh, that's a school bus sign. Oh, that's a yield to duck sign. Oh, that's a bears crossing the road sign. So I can merge these two things together. So you get the idea of what I'm talking about here. As you're creating networking labs for yourself and you're building up your labs, try to incorporate some of the older topics you learned 2-3 months ago into the lab that you're building now to refresh your memory. All right, so let's talk about lab practice. How do you get lab practice? At the CCNA level, I think probably one of the easiest and certainly the cheapest things to do is to use Cisco's packet tracer tool. And this is free. You can Google it. Cisco packet tracer download. So you just go right here, and if you sign up for Cisco's Network Academy, and you may say, whoa, hold on a second, Keith. I don't have time to do Network Academy classes. I don't even know where they're held. I can't. No, I'm not asking you to do that. When you sign up for the Networking Academy, you're basically just registering. You're not enrolling in classes. You don't have to go anywhere. All you're doing is just creating a username and a password for the Networking Academy, which gets you into their system. You don't have to do anything further than that. But once you sign up for Cisco Networking Academy and you enroll, like it says right here, remember, you're not enrolling in any particular school or institution or anything, then you can download their packet tracer tool for free. Okay, so that you don't have to worry about going somewhere or taking their exams or taking their classes or anything. And when you download packet tracer, let me bring it up right here, and you start it up. Let's see here, where is it? Cisco packet tracer. In just a moment here, I'll be able to pull it over my other screen. Okay, so packet tracer looks like this. So once you open it up, this is a simulation tool where you can create your own networks and play with them. You certainly don't want to play an experiment on your school's network or your corporate network, but here is a perfectly safe, what we sometimes call sandbox area, where you can play on a network, you can screw it up, and it's not going to hurt anybody. So for once you download Packet Tracer, you can create networks. For example, let's just drag a couple of routers in here. Okay, a couple of routers. Let's go to do a switch. How about let's just do a 3560 switch and maybe a 2950 switch. And then here you can connect things together. All right, this is a straight through cable. So we got from our router going to our switch. And so for example, you do that, and then you can double click on a router, or actually single click on a router, go to the command line, and you can practice your Cisco iOS commands. You can make labs for yourself and practice the lab. So as you're watching a video on RIP version 2, which is part of the ICND1 test, and you learn from that video, or you're reading a book, you learn what the commands are to make it do something. Open up Packet Tracer, try it out. Get a couple routers, connect them together, and try to implement RIP version 2 on there. Try to practice with those commands and see if they do what the book or the video says they'll do. So this is a great resource for you because, like I said, it's absolutely free. And I mentioned earlier that probably 90% of all of the Cisco iOS commands you would need to be familiar with and have memorized are available to you here within the various devices that Packet Tracer has. Great, great tool. Now, so this is my number one pick. For those of you pursuing your CCNA, that's my number one pick. There are some additional options. There is another tool called GNS3. So GNS3 is also free to download. You would actually just go to gns3.com. Let me zoom in on that here so you can see that URL, gns3.com. Here's GNS3. You can download the software. Now, here is the pro and the con to GNS3 versus Packet Tracer. Both the GNS3 software and Packet Tracer are free to download. That's great. Both of them, once you've downloaded it, you can do stuff without any network connectivity whatsoever. You could be offline and create your topologies and play with them. That's great. Now, the nice thing about Packet Tracer is it's fully self-contained. You don't have to download any additional software to work with Packet Tracer. It does all of itself by itself. It's all self-contained. That's not true with GNS3. So GNS3, Packet Tracer is a software simulator. So like the simulator you see when you actually take the CCNA exam, which is not real Cisco software, it's not real. So the software that, you know how like on your laptop you've got Windows or you've got iOS if you've got a Mac? Well, Cisco routers and switches, the software that runs on them is called iOS. It stands for Internetworking Operating System or Internetworking Operating Software, iOS. Well, when you're using Packet Tracer, you're not really dealing with real iOS. You're dealing with software that was made to sort of look and feel like iOS. And the downsides to that is that sometimes a command that you want to learn, that you want to practice, is not available in Packet Tracer. There are some commands that you need to know for the CCNA that just aren't there. They're just not in Packet Tracer, and that's unfortunate. Another unfortunate thing is that sometimes when you configure things in Packet Tracer, you will experience bugs and problems that you would not experience if you were actually working with a real router and switch running real Cisco iOS software. That's a problem. And then the third problem is sometimes the output that you get from commands or the way that certain commands interact with other commands is not going to be the same as what you would get in real iOS. It might be close, but not exactly the same. For example, for those of you who have already been studying a little bit for your CCNA, you know that one of the topics you need to study for the ICND2 exam is something called spanning tree. Spanning tree is a very big topic that you'll be hit with when you take your ICND2 exam. It's a LAN switching technology. Well, if you're configuring spanning tree and packet tracer, there's some commands that are just not available to you that you do need to know. You need to know for the CCNA ICND2. When you're issuing some verification and monitoring commands in packet tracer, like show spanning tree, the output that you'll see is not exactly the same as the output that you'll see in a real switch running real iOS. That's a little bit different. So those are some of the downsides with packet tracer. What does that have to do with GNS3? Well, GNS3 is not a standalone product. Once you download GNS3 for free, GNS3 actually pairs or partners up with real Cisco iOS software. So the only way that you can create networking topologies and play with them in GNS3 is if you actually have the ability to get your hands on real Cisco iOS software. Now, how you do that, you either have to be a Cisco customer or, there are other ways, but you have to find some real Cisco iOS software that would run on a real Cisco router, and you sort of merge or incorporate that into GNS3. So the pro or the benefit of GNS3 is that once you actually do get it working, that is real software. Everything that's available on a real router, all the same commands, all the same output that you would see on a real router, you get in GNS3. It is not a simulator like packet tracer is. The downside with GNS3 is, number one, you got to have access to real iOS software. If you don't have that, GNS3 doesn't do much of anything for you. And number two, from a switching perspective, GNS3 is kind of lacking. There are actually commands and features, for example, like port security. Port security is a big topic in the CCNA exam for LAN switching. You can't configure port security on LAN switches in GNS3. You can do it in packet tracer. So for all those reasons, I would say that between GNS3 and packet tracer, for CCNA candidates, I would steer them towards packet tracer. Even though it's got some downsides like I've mentioned, I would recommend that. Now there's another alternative when it comes to like creating virtual labs or simulated labs, which is a product that Cisco sells, which is called VIRL. It stands for the Virtual Internet Routing Lab, VIRL, or Cisco's VIRL. I would not recommend CCNA candidates to look into VIRL for basically two reasons. Number one, it's not free. GNS3 and packet tracer, absolutely free. Cisco's VIRL, you have to pay for it. It's not a lot, but if free versus not free, that is a factor. And number two, it is hideously complex to get running and get started. So, if you're at the CCNA level, you don't want to be banging your head against the keyboard because you're like, oh my gosh, just to download and get this software working is a nightmare. I don't even understand what they're asking me to do here. With VIRL, you might experience that. It's really complex just to get it working. Packet tracer and GNS3, totally easy. Just a few clicks of a button and it's ready to work. So for those reasons, I would steer away from VIRL for CCNA people who've got limited to no experience with computer networking at all. Okay. And then there's a fourth option. Especially when it comes to switching, certainly with GNS3 and VIRL, switching is rather limited in what you can do. In packet tracer, switching is there. There's a lot more switching stuff you can do at the CCNA level, but like I said, there are certain commands that are just not available to you. And the output of certain commands is not really what you would see in real Cisco software. So if you want the real experience, there's nothing like logging into a real router or switch to do your labs. So if you want to take that approach, getting your hands on real routers and switches to do your labs, you have two avenues you could take. One is you could purchase your own lab gear, which isn't that expensive. For probably less than $500 US, you could make a fairly nice little CCNA lab for yourself of a couple of routers and a couple switches and the various cables that you need, and you could do that. Or there are companies like I&E that actually have racks of equipment and you can rent time on that equipment. So you don't have to figure out what do I need to buy, what software do I need to buy, what modules go in here, did I buy the right cables, do I have the right power requirements at my house to plug everything in without blowing my circuit breaker. If you don't want to worry about all that stuff, it's probably just a lot easier to rent time on somebody else's equipment. Let me just briefly show you what we at I&E have available, and I'm just going to tailor this towards people pursuing their CCNA. So if you go to racks.ine.com, this should come up here in a moment. I think I've got the URL right. I usually go into a slightly different way, but let's see what happens here. Okay, let's go into it the way I usually go into. So if you go to ine.com right here, and you click on login. Now let me just, if you don't have an I&E members account, it will prompt you to create one, absolutely free. Just have to provide your a username, a password, your email address, and that's it. And then once you've logged in, you'll get to this. This is what we call the I&E members dashboard, in case you've never seen this before. So it's free to get here, even if you haven't actually paid for anything. And then from here, if you're interested in renting time on our racks, you would click on what says Rack Rentals right here. Now, we have all sorts of racks depending on what particular Cisco certification exam you're pursuing. And what we're focused on right now are the CCNA, CCNP routing and switching racks. These particular racks, if you click on Rack Rental Guide, and so far all of this is free, you can see this rack, when you spend time out, will give you access to 3 physical switches and 4 physical routers. Already pre-cabled for you, and this is real equipment. And you can spend as little as 1 hour on this, or as much time as you like. So how do you actually get to this? Well, step number 1 is you have to purchase what's called tokens. The list price of a token is $1. $1 equals 1 token, although a lot of times we have specials and sales. Right now we actually have one going on. I'm going to show you that in just a second. But at the full list price, $1 equals 1 token. So you can see this particular rack costs $3 an hour. So 3 tokens per hour. So you would purchase like 100 tokens or 200 tokens or whatever you want up front. And then once you've got those tokens that you've purchased, you would schedule time on this rack. So I'll just click on schedule. And let's say you decide, okay, on Saturday, so that's going to be the 7th, I want to work on these racks from, let's say, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. All right, so done for that. And I want to go from 4/7 to 4/7. I want to go until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I want to do 2 hours on this rack. Done. Then you click on search. And it says, okay, the rack is available. The 2 hours are available during the time slot that you want. And if you click book, it will decrement 6 tokens from the tokens that you've purchased. And now that time slot will be available to you. Or you can do it right now. You can click on calendar view, or you can just do it right now for like an hour or two. And then once your time slot is ready, you can log into your rack. And what you'll see is something that looks like this. And now you can access your 3 routers and your 4 routers and your 3 switches, and you can create labs yourself, which I strongly encourage you to do. Or you could use some pre-scripted labs. And so I promised you earlier I'd talk about workbooks, so let's talk about that. So when you're trying to get hands-on practice and you're trying to learn the Cisco iOS, the command line, and you're doing either via Packet Tracer, GNS3, or our rack rentals, or your own rack that you created and bought yourself, either way, you've got 2 ways that you could approach learning the commands. One method, which I strongly advise that you do, is to create your own labs. So let's say you're reading a book about RIP version 2. Let's just say that particular topic. And as you're reading, you're reading, oh, okay, well, here's the command to get this router to talk to this router. Here's another command here to get them to exchange information. So you're learning the commands. I recommend you create a lab yourself. So what you should typically do is you should start with like a piece of paper. And as you're reading about a protocol or a feature or something, ask yourself, what is the minimum, the absolute minimum quantity of devices I would need to practice this particular topic? You know, sure, with a routing protocol, you could go crazy and create a topology of like 15 or 20 routers. But just to learn the basics of how the protocol works, do you really need to create a network that large? Probably not. That's why our CCNA racks are fairly constrained in scope. That's why we give you 3 routers and 4 switches, because you can pretty much practice almost anything that you would need to learn with that quantity of equipment. A lot of times, just a couple of switches or a couple of routers will be enough for you to practice whatever it is that you need to practice. So think about that. You're reading about, you know, RIP version 2 as a particular feature, and you say, okay, I'm going to need 2 routers connected together with a cable. And then as you're reading a little bit further, you say, okay, here's the command. So you write down your piece of paper. Here's the commands that are related to RIP that I'm going to need to practice. And then write down on a piece of paper what your objectives are. My objective is I want router 1 to send some networks via RIP to router 2. And maybe I want to practice what happens when I make this intentional error. If I intentionally screw something up on router 1, I want to see what that's going to look like on router 2. So sort of define what your lab is, create your lab, build it out on a piece of paper, and then rent your time on your rack or open up Packet Tracer or whatever and try it out. Try to do the lab that you've created yourself. I think that's one of the best ways to learn Cisco iOS commands is if you're sort of getting your creative juices flowing and you're designing and you're testing and you're monitoring your own lab that you thought of yourself. Now, another approach is to follow along with a lab that somebody else has created. So, for example, a workbook lab where it says, here's the topology you're going to create, and it will tell you, here are your objectives. Make this, do this, do this, do this. And then you try to get to work, and then in that same workbook, it'll say, okay, here are the commands you should have typed. Here's the output you should have seen. This is the important part of that output you would be looking for. That's a more structured approach to doing labs. And so let me just show you sort of like what a workbook looks like when you do that. So for ICND 1, we'll just focus on that right now. We have a workbook. So you can see right here under the workbooks category, we have an ICND 1 workbook and an ICND 2 workbook. I'll click on the ICND 1 workbook here for a moment. So when you click on that, each one of these things is considered a task. So for example, if I click on port security, this particular workbook assumes that you are renting time on our INE racks. So does that mean you could not do this in Packet Tracer? No, you could probably do much of this, not all of it, but you could do much of it in Packet Tracer, but you would have to tweak Packet Tracer. It wouldn't exactly end up looking like we have here, so just be aware that when you use our workbooks, generally speaking, not all the time, the assumption is that you're renting time on our racks to get it done. So if you rent time on our CCNA rack, you've already got the 4 routers and the 3 switches. And you can see here, these are your objectives. They'll say, do this, configure this, configure this. So you'll try it out, you try to get to work, and if you get stuck, click right here, and it'll say, okay, this is what you should have done. These are the commands you should have typed in. And verification. Here are the show commands you would have typed, and it highlights this is the particular output that you want to pay attention to. And this is why. And so this is what a workbook looks like. Whether it be an INE workbook or somebody else's workbook, it basically is pre-scripted for you with what your objectives are. You try to make it work, and then somewhere in the workbook it shows you what the commands are and what the output of the command is. Our ICND2 workbook is a little bit different. If I click on that, that's a video-based workbook. So this is a series of videos. Now this ICND2 workbook was based on the assumption that you are using Cisco's Packet Tracer tool. So for example, if I go to influencing spanning tree root bridge selection. So in this particular video, you will see yours truly, and I will start out by showing you a topology diagram, and I will, in the video, explain what the objectives are. Let's say, okay, here it is, root bridge selection. So in the video, I'll say, these are your objectives. So you would watch this, and I would be verbally explaining the objective in a little bit more detail, what you want to do. And towards the end of the video, so like right about here, if I was doing this, I would probably pause it, and I would either write these down, or it might just be easier for me to do a screen grab and just grab this as like a JPEG or something like that. And task 2 objectives, okay? And then you go to work on this, and then once you think you've gotten it right, the next video is a solution to that. So that was influencing spanning tree root bridge, and here's the solution video. And so now in the solution video, I actually go through packet tracer. So here's the packet tracer topology. And by the way, when you use this particular workbook, if I go back here a little bit, notice here in the upper left corner, there's another icon that says View Course Files. Many of our workbooks and many of our videos have this icon, so look for this if you purchase any of our products. And when you click on that, you can download a zip file here, and in this particular situation, this zip file contains a whole bunch of pre-configurations that you can load into Packet Tracer. So instead of having to build the configuration up from scratch, drag and drop all those routers and switches, drag and drop all the connections, type in all the pre-configuration commands, this zip file has all that stuff done for you, so you can just import into Packet Tracer and get going on each task and each solution. So just a little thing there. You know, whenever you purchase any of our videos or any of our workbooks, look to see if this icon, View Course Files, exists, because that's additional stuff you can download, like topology diagrams, maybe questions and answers that go along with the video. All that sort of stuff is in there. Now, before I forget to mention it, I want to point out, as we're talking about purchasing products and we're talking about purchasing tokens so you can do lab practice, be aware that we do have this 25% off sale going on until today. As a matter of fact, it looks like today is the last day to do this, but we frequently have other promotions and things going on. This is a pretty good one right here. So if you're thinking about purchasing tokens, if you're thinking about purchasing some videos or something like that from I&E, might want to take advantage of the sale that's going on right here. So that is a long-winded approach to doing lab practice. Also, you're going to want to get familiar with Wireshark. What is Wireshark? Well, as you start learning about networking, you start learning that your laptop or your computer's connection to the network is actually getting a lot of data, a lot of stuff that you don't have visibility to, that you don't see on your screen. And as you start learning about networking, you start realizing, hey, I'd like to see that. I'd like to have visibility to all the stuff that my laptop is seeing that it's not showing me, the stuff that's coming in off the network that it's seeing. And Wireshark is a free software tool that lets you have visibility to that. Let me show you how to get to it. So just go to wireshark.org. I'll zoom in on this here so you can see it. Wireshark.org. And then from there, you can download the Wireshark software for free. And when you start it up, let me just show you what it looks like. So this is what Wireshark looks like when you first start it up. You would select one of your network adapters. Now, you might be thinking, whoa, 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 wait a second, Keith. I don't even know what a network adapter is. I'm viewing this because I want to learn about networking. That's okay. After studying like 10 hours of networking, even within the first 5 hours of networking or less, you'll learn what a network adapter is. It's basically the connection on your tablet or on your laptop that connects you to your network. That's what a network adapter is. And so this here is showing you the various network adapters you have. And you can see just by looking at it, for example, looking at mine, you can see that by far the Wi-Fi one, this one here is having the most activity. So this is probably the one I would want to monitor. So I would select that, and then I would double click it. And now what this is doing is this is actually capturing and displaying everything that my Wi-Fi adapter is seeing on the network. And so this can be really useful. This is a great visual way to dig into some of the stuff that you're reading in books. And you can open it up. For example, you're going to learn about what IP version 4 is. And in a book or in a video, it's going to teach you about what the fields are in an IP version 4 header. Well, this really brings it into focus when using Wireshark. You can open up an IP version 4 packet and you can actually see for yourself what these fields are. Like I said, free tool. Definitely want to get yourself familiar with Wireshark. This will really help you to learn the topics. And then one other study resource you have available to you are practice exams. Now, there's a lot of companies out there that offer practice exams. A lot of books have practice exams built into them. So, we at INE also offer some practice exams. But regardless of where you go, you don't want to sit for your ICND 1 or your ICND 2 exam unless you've done a lot of practice exams before you've gone in there. So wherever you go, make sure you get some practice exams under your belt. So we have an ICND 1 practice exam and an ICND 2 practice exam. So if I click on the ICND 1 practice exam for a moment, this is what it looks like. So when you begin your practice exam attempt, like the real ICND 1, this is a timed exam. You were given 90 minutes to do it, 1 hour and 30 minutes. Like the real ICND 1 exam, which gives you somewhere between like 55 and 65 questions, you'll be given 60 multiple choice questions randomly pulled from a pool. It'll give you the countdown timer so you can see how long you have to go. I'm just going to randomly select some stuff right here. If it's multiple choice single answer, it'll say select the best answer. If it's multiple choice, I'm just selecting some random stuff here. If it's multiple choice multiple answer, it'll say, let's see here, let's get to one of these. So far these are all single answers. Single answer. Select the best answer. I know there's multiple choice, multiple answers in here. Well, as I'm going along here, the multiple choice, multiple answers will actually say select 2 answers or select 1 or select 3 answers. So far, all I've gotten is multiple choice, single answer. But I know when I designed this that there were ones that said multiple choice, multiple answers. Well, either way, as we go through here, so let's say my time is done, and I said, okay, I don't have any more time to complete this. I just want to see how I've done so far. You can select End and Submit for grading. Submit. And it'll show you here, for each of the topics, you got 7% correct in network fundamentals. You got 11% correct in infrastructure services. And, oh, I got question number 1 wrong. Really? What did I do wrong? Well, if I click on question number 1, you can see right here. Here's the question. This was my answer. The correct answer was this one right here. So these are examples of our ICND 1 and ICND 2 practice exams. Unfortunately, right now, as I'm speaking to you, if you go to streaming.ine.com, they are not showing up there. Our developers are working on that. So if you go to Cisco, and CCNA routing and switching, nowhere in this list does it show those practice exams. So if this is something that interests you, I would recommend right now taking a screen grab of that, because you have to know the direct link to get to those particular exams at this moment. Hopefully in the next few days that will no longer be the case, but for now you need to know what the links are. So you might want to take a screen grab of that. All right, so with that, I know that was a fairly long section, probably the longest section of today. Let's go into the Q&A section here and see if I can answer any of your questions. So Ahmed asked a really good question. Is it helpful if I have a programming certification along with your CCNA? Absolutely. I absolutely think that that would help you get some employment. Okay. What other questions can I help you with? All right, well, I don't see any other questions coming in at the moment. We've been going for a couple of hours. Mr. Fail, standstill. Are there people with all CCI certs available? Not sure how to interpret your question. If you're asking me, is there anybody out there who has already obtained every single CCIE available? There probably are, but they would be few and far between. I know some of our instructors here at I&E have like 5 and 6 CCIEs, but there are several CCIEs. I don't know if anybody has every single one. So Ed, you're asking, is the CCNA good for data center? So that's a good question. So there are the CCNA routing and switching, which is the ICND1 and the ICND2. That's sort of like your entry-level point into the world of networking. Now, if you already know something about networking, if you have a little bit of networking knowledge, you might already know, hey, ultimately, security is what I'd like to get into, or data center is what I'd like to get into. I'd like to get into some sort of specialty of networking. You're still going to need to start with your CCNA routing and switching. A lot of the basic concepts of like the basics of routing, the basics of IP addressing, the basics of LAN switching. Those other CCNAs, like there's a CCNA for data center, there's a CCNA for wireless, there's a CCNA for security. Well, if you go right to those as your first certification and you don't already know the stuff in the CCNA routing and switching, you're going to have a problem. For example, the CCNA security exam, I'm just going to pick that one. That one assumes you already know IP addressing. That one assumes you already know the basics of routing. You already know the basics of switching. As you're pursuing your CCNA security in that book, they're throwing terms at you because they assume you already have learned those terms from the CCNA routing and switching exam. So this is typically what I recommend to people. I say, look, start with your ICND1 and your ICND2. Get your CCNA routing and switching. Now, once you've got that, I usually tell people it's still a little too early at that point to branch out into a specialty because there's still a lot about the foundation of routing and switching that you haven't learned even at the CCNA level. That's why I usually recommend people go up to the CCNP level and take the 3 CCNP routing and switching exams. Now, once you've got your CCNP in routing and switching, then you're at a perfect position to branch off into a specialty if you wish, like CCNA data center, CCNA security, or continue up the chain, and if routing and switching is still what interests you, go for your CCIE in routing and switching. But I definitely recommend you start with the CCNA RNS first, get your CCNP in RNS, and then branch out from there if that's what you wish to do. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, so we've been going for a couple of hours here. Let's take a break. I don't know about you, but I know that my throat could use a little break here. Let's take like a 15-minute break, and then we will come back after 15 minutes. I'm going to put a little 15-minute break video up here for you guys to watch, and then I'll be right back after that break is over.
I think that when I first started that there was, I had a perception that I knew a lot about the core protocols. And now, I realized I didn't when I first started. And this has really filled in those gaps. Just getting in there, labbing the stuff, seeing the problems, correcting the problems.
I've never seen anything out there like this. And I've been to multiple Cisco courses for my CCNP, CCNA. But this, you actually get to see the technology work. So it kind of helps stick it in your brain.
Our sessions are very interactive, always available to answer any questions during the session or offline.
He gives you the right mentality you need to approach any problem or troubleshoot or, answer a question on a test.
It's helped me a lot, even stuff that's not even for the CCIE, I had the all access pass. Just the knowledge that you get from them, not only this is how you configure it, but they actually show you in the video, this is how it works. And that's what you need. You can't just read a document and be like, well, this is the configuration. So hopefully it works, because sometimes it doesn't work.
I wish that I'd started off with material just like this, because I would have understood right off the bat what the theory is and what it's actually doing in the command line.
It's definitely more advanced. I think it's explained in a better way, better analogies. I think it's tougher, which is good. I took one that was earlier and it was easier, you know what I mean? So it gave me this false confidence. And so now getting into this stuff and you see wow, this is a little bit more advanced. So I want to do some more of this stuff, and now I'm starting to feel way more comfortable.
A few of the weak spots that I had, I'm able to get over those things and understand those things better.
It's easy to study for a test and just study exactly what you need to know, but in this class we've gone kind of above and beyond, and he showed us things that can actually apply in real world, and some things that may not be applicable to the exam, but are good things to know, especially when troubleshooting. And
I definitely recommend it. I've been recommending it. Just using the materials, now going to the camp, I'd recommend it all day long. It's a completely different learning experience.
The best way to become an expert is to learn from one. With INE, you will have access to the most experienced and esteemed IT and development experts in the world. Our content is expertly driven and solely designed to provide industry-best instruction that will make earning your certification or advancing your career easier than ever. INE's dedicated instructors have already trained thousands of experts. So what are you waiting for? Sign up today for an all-access pass for unlimited access to thousands of hours of content and our free live V-seminars. And be sure to download our mobile app for iOS and Android that gives you access to all of our training on the go. INE, experts at making you an expert.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for staying with me throughout the break. George, I've seen your questions there. What I would recommend that you do, I got that information that I sent you by just Googling. I'll show you what I did here. I just Googled CCNT certificate, how long? No, let's see, what was it? Certificate. This is it. So CCNT certificate, how long to receive? Those are the keywords that I used here in Google. Make this a little bit bigger for you. And this very first thread here is where I got that information that I sent you. And here they talk about the Pearson Credential Manager that you can log into. So I would just look through this thread, and it looks like it gives you some ideas on how you can track that and figure out where the status is of that certificate. And Ed, you have a good question. Would you suggest for someone who is already working data center to start with the CCNA data center or go right to the CCNA routing and switching? I have not looked at the CCNA data center official certification guidebooks or any of the blueprint items, but my experience has been I've looked at both the CCNA collaboration, which is dealing with like IP telephony and running video over your network. I've also looked at the CCNA security stuff, and both of those assume that you already have CCNA routing and switching. Both of those make references to IP addressing, routing topics, switching topics that you would have no clue of if you did not have your CCNA routing and switching already achieved. So I'm going to guess that the CCNA data center is probably similar. So it really depends on your existing level of knowledge and experience. If you already are somewhat familiar with routing and switching and IP addressing and IPv6 addressing, yes, you can probably jump right into the CCNA data center certification. But just be aware it's going to most likely make that assumption like the other ones did that I have looked at. Okay, so I've got just a little bit more to go here. Maybe another 30 minutes or so, if that. Maybe only 15 or 20 minutes to go through of my last couple sections. So this next one here, I have labeled personal observations. What do I mean by that? I try to take the CCNA exam at least once a year just to stay fresh on what topics are the big heavy hitters. In other words, what topics you'll see a lot of questions on, what topics you don't get very many questions on, to get a feel for how are they structuring their answers, to refresh my memory on what types of simulations did I see, just to do that. And so personal observations are my observations from the last time I took the test, what I saw, what types of things I saw on it. Of course, without breaking any non-disclosure agreements. I'm not about to do that. So let me preface this by saying that when I do this, I always take the CCNA accelerated exam. I don't take the individual ICND1 and ICND2. I take the accelerated exam, so just be aware that's where I'm coming from with this. All right, so let's start with quantity of questions. So the CCNA accelerated, if you actually read the blueprint and everything, says that you'll get somewhere between 60 and 70 questions. The last time I took it, I got 64 questions. Okay, so I got right there in the middle. And each of the individual tests, like the ICND1 and the ICND2, they state that you should expect to get somewhere between 40 and 55 questions. So you can probably bet you'll get about 50 questions, or 48, something like that. So all three of the exams are 90 minutes, whether you take the ICND1, the ICND2, or the accelerated exam. You get 90 minutes, unless, like I said, you're in a non-native English-speaking country, in which case they'll give you an additional 30 minutes on top of that 90 minutes. What about scoring? An absolutely perfect score is 1,000. The minimum that you need to get a passing score is 810. Now, it's not really going to help a whole lot because you don't know how each question is weighted. In other words, when you're looking at a question, you have no idea whether that question is worth 20 points, 5 points. You don't know if there's any partial credit. You don't know how they do their scoring. So all I can tell you is that you need at least 810 out of 1,000 in order to actually pass any of those exams. I'd like to briefly mention something about the quality of the questions. This is an unfortunate reality, but you should be aware of this going into the exam. And if you start researching like CCNA forums and stuff and you read about other people's experiences when they took the exam, I think they'll back this up as well. That a lot of times the questions aren't very well written. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's one thing to have a minor grammatical error, right? And to maybe misspell a word or something like that. You can sort of deal with that. And you'll see a little bit of that in there, unfortunately. But what really irritates me, and unfortunately a lot of other people who have taken the CCNA, is that sometimes you'll get questions that were just not written really well. There's kind of vague or ambiguous. In other words, you'll get a question that will say, okay, here's your question. It'll say, select the best answer. And it'll give you 5 answers. And you'll read the question. You'll say, well, technically, answer A and answer E are both correct. Reading the question as the question is written, A or E would be correct. And yet this is saying select the best answer, which means there's only one correct answer. That's, to me, an example of a poorly written question. It should not be vague like that. So you'll just have to try to guess at what they're aiming for, what they think is the correct answer, because there will be some times like that when you're looking at the answers and you think there's more than the correct amount of what they're saying. They say select 2 and you've identified 3. Or they select 2 and you say, only this one is correct. There are no 2 correct answers here. Only one of these could be, or none of them are potentially correct. That's just an unfortunate reality that the quality of the questions, not always, but sometimes, could leave something to be desired. So just be aware of that. That's just something you'll have to deal with. Simulations. Like I mentioned, you'll get anywhere from 1 to maybe 4 simulations. The last time I took the exam, I got 1. I got 1 simulation and that was it. And the last thing for this particular short section here, I want to mention something called brain dump in your car. What is that referring to? Well, first of all, this only applies to you if you fail the exam. If you pass the exam, you don't have to do this last thing. But statistics say you will probably fail it on your first attempt. The last time I looked it up, the statistics said something like, for the ICND1 and the ICND2, like 70% of all people that take it fail it the first time. So it's a pretty good probability that you will fail it the first time you take it. Now, here's what I recommend you do. As you're taking the exam, you will run across those questions that you just do not know the answer, and you will just have to guess. When that happens, before you go on to the next question, on that little laminated piece of paper they gave you and with your dry erase marker, write down like 3 or 4 words that will help you to remember that question. Maybe something like STP root bridge cost. Right? Maybe the question was all about what is the iOS command to manipulate the cost to blah, 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 blah. So you want to write down that piece of paper 3 or 4 words that will help you to remember what that question was that you just had to guess on. Now, flash forward. You're on the very last question. You have not punched the submit or the test or end for grading yet. So you've still got, a few minutes left. Look at that laminated sheet of paper. Now, let's say that you've got 5 or 6 minutes left on the clock. Okay, you're done. You got 5 or 6 or 8 minutes left. Before you press that end button, just stare at that laminated piece of paper. Try to memorize it. Just stare at it and try to memorize all those notes that you made to yourself of all those questions that you struggled with, that you didn't know. Try to cram that into your brain. Then press the end button. Now if it says, congratulations, fantastic, ignore everything you just memorized. You passed the test, move on with your life. But if you're like one of those many other people that says, oh, you're terrible, you failed miserably, go back and clean up the bathroom or whatever. Okay, if you get some message, probably not like that, but some message indicating that you failed, here's what you're going to want to do. Before you get up, spend a few more seconds looking at that whiteboard, then you probably want to erase it. Verbally tell yourself that quote. So you're walking out of the front desk, you're looking at that person in the eyeballs who's going to give you back your keys and your wallet and everything, but in your mind, you're trying to remember what those questions were that you screwed up on, that you had to guess. Now you go back to your car or your bicycle or whatever it was that you used to get to the testing center. Before you go anywhere, whip out your phone, whip out your tablet, and bring up some sort of audio recording device that will allow you to record your voice and start the recording, close your eyes, and do a brain dump of the exam. Before you leave the testing center, start recording your voice. There was a question in there on spanning tree root bridge. I didn't know how to do that. There was a question there on EIGRP neighbor relationships and authentication. I had to guess that one. There was a question there on IPv6 link local addresses. I didn't remember that. Blah, blah, blah. So just do that. And eventually, after a few minutes, you'll be all, okay, I think that's it. I can't remember any other questions I had to guess. Stop. Stop the recording. Now, go back to your house. Go back to your place of employment. And then when you have a free moment, play that recording back to yourself and type it up in like Notepad or WordPad or Microsoft Word or something. What are you doing? You are creating a study guide for yourself to help focus your studying on the topics that you flubbed, the topics that you did not do well. So the next time you go take the test, you have had concentrated, focused studying to help you pass it the next time around. I'll tell you this right now. If you don't do a brain dump in your car, if you wait until you get home or you get to your office and then you try to do that, you will have forgotten a lot of those questions. While those questions are fresh in your mind, as fresh as they could possibly be, you want to record them. Don't wait until you get home. So, I promised you that section would be short. Let me see if there are any unanswered questions. So Ed Goodman 1, do you have to read between the lines? Yep, sometimes you do. Unfortunately, that is the truth. Some of the questions require you to read between the lines. What other questions does anybody have? All right, I don't see any other questions coming in. Cost of the test, $165 US for the ICND1 and the ICND2. And the accelerated test, let's see, what's 165 times 2? That's one test 300 plus 330. I believe the CCNA accelerated is 325, so it's like $5 cheaper for the CCNA accelerated. Corwin says, I'm taking the exams in 3 weeks. What materials do you recommend that I use for review? That's really it's a really subjective question, Corwin. I mean, certainly you could use videos for review. So the nice thing, if I was going to take the exam in 3 weeks, the nice thing about our videos, and I'll just show you this here, is I would go to Cisco. Once again, this is streaming.ine.com in case you're coming to us late. Streaming.ine.com. Cisco CCNA routing and switching. So I would go to, I don't know which test you're planning on taking, but if it's ICND1, I would click on this. And I would just scroll through this and I would say, okay, which of these topics here do I feel weak on? Which, I've been doing my studying now for a few months. I'm going to take my exam in 3 weeks. I just want to go back and try to re-hit some of those topics that maybe it's been a while, maybe I've forgotten. So what's nice here is because of this format that you can see here, you can scroll through the list and, oh, named access list. Okay, it's been a long time since I've done that one. And you can just watch the video. And you know exactly how long it's going to take you because it says 3 minutes. You could do that in a book as well, right? You could look through the table of contents of the official certification guidebook and just randomly go back to some topics, but you're not going to necessarily know how long it's going to take, whereas a video, it exactly tells you how many minutes that is. So you might just want to take that approach. Are there any other questions? So the last topic I want to go into, and then this will wrap us up for the day, is something I called common pitfalls. In other words, what are some things that people do incorrectly, or they fail to do, or they do it in the wrong way, which either derails their studying attempts. And what I mean by derails their studying attempt, meaning that either it leads them to where they stop studying, they just give up, or it leads them studying into a rat hole, they start going down a path that they don't need to study, or it just ultimately ends up hurting them when they take the exam and ends up causing them to fail. So that hopefully you can avoid these pitfalls. Step number 1, and I'll tell you right now, I am very guilty of this myself. Failing to create or adhere to a dedicated schedule. I hate dedicated schedules. This one is really tough for me. But because of this, because I don't do this, it takes me like 6 times as long to study for an exam as it would normally take if I did do this. So I'm speaking to myself right now just as much as I'm speaking to you. When preparing to study for an exam, what I should do, what you should do, is to go into your Google Calendar or whatever calendar you use and block off a time frame every single day that you're going to use for studying. Maybe say, okay, every single day from 3 o'clock until 4 o'clock, that will be my study time. And then from 6 o'clock till 7 o'clock, that'll be my second hour of study time. And just dedicate yourself to that. You know, unless your house is burning down around you, just make sure that you stick to that schedule. If you don't have a schedule that you stick to, it's so easy to get distracted. So easy not to study when other stuff comes up that feels like it's more important. Becoming overwhelmed. Yes, there's a lot of stuff to remember here. There's a lot of stuff to memorize. But remember, that's what flashcards are for. Test yourself frequently, over and over and over again. Don't just test yourself like once a month or once every couple weeks. Every day you should be testing yourself. Every day you should be whipping out those flashcards and spending like the first 10 or 15 minutes of your studying time going through your flashcards, both the old topics and the topics you just studied, over and over and over again. And just remember, it's just consistent, slowly making your way through the material, doing labs. I can't reinforce enough. Lab, lab, lab. It's one thing to read about this stuff, but you'll be able to memorize it so much easier if you just continually lab it up over and over and over again. Not learning IP addressing and subnetting well. So sometimes people, when they go into, especially the ICND-1 exam, haven't really learned binary, haven't really learned hexadecimal very well. And so when they go into the exam might give them something. Let's see if I can whip this up right here. If you see a question in the exam that looks like this, this would be like an ICND-1 question. And they're asking you to convert that subnet mask from binary into dotted decimal. You will fail if you look at that and you say, oh, okay, let's see here. That's 128 plus 64 plus 32 plus 16. You don't want to do that. You want to be able to go in there and say, okay, I know exactly what that pattern is. That's 255. I know exactly what that pattern is. That's 255. I know exactly what that is. That's 240. And that's 0. You want to be able to do it that quick. So make sure you spend a lot of time on IP addressing and subnetting to where if you get an IP addressing or subnetting question, you actually say, yes, this is cool. I can get this one slammed out in like 15 seconds. Because a lot of times people don't do that. They feel kind of shaky about IP addressing and subnetting when they go into the test. And then they end up wasting way too much time doing just those basics. Neglecting the trivial points. What do I mean by trivial points? as you read through your books, as you read online documents, as you watch videos, there's going to be a lot of times when you're hit with numbers, like in 15 seconds, this happens. Port number 80 corresponds to this. There are 500 of these. Those are things that should wake you up. Those are things that most people say, oh, that's trivia. You know, that's a number, that's a value, that's a fact. I'm not going to bother memorizing facts. I'm going to bother memorizing like the names of things, and when one thing happens, here's what something happens. Guess what? Those facts, that's what Cisco loves to test you on. Yes, in the real world, you can Google all those facts, right? Who really needs to know what the OSPF hello timer is or the spanning tree max age value is? You can Google that in like 15 seconds or less. But for the CCNA and all the other Cisco certifications, they want you to memorize that stuff. So if you go into the CCNA certification and you have failed to memorize those timers, memorize those IP protocol values, memorize those administrative distance values, you failed to memorize the TCP UDP port numbers, all those factoids, you will fail the exam. So you definitely want to, that's prime stuff for a flashcard. If you're ever watching a video or reading a book and it mentions a fact like that, pause, create a flashcard for yourself on that and test yourself on it. And the last common pitfall is failing to test yourself with practice exams. You don't want to walk into that CCNA exam until you are confident in all the subjects. Well, how are you going to be confident unless you go through some practice exams? So, of course, I would prefer you go through I&E's practice exams. I created them, I authored them, I think they're pretty good. But regardless of what practice exam you actually end up using, I would recommend you use multiple practice exams. Don't just rely on one, and do them over and over and over and over again. And before you actually schedule your ICND 1, followed by your ICND 2, you should be able to be consistently getting like 90% correct in your practice exams over and over and over again. So don't leave that out. That should be part of your studying process. And that brings me to the end of that last section. Let me see if there's any other questions I can answer for you. What would be the best method to study? Yeah, I would say you should have the official certification guidebook, either in print or like online on Safari. And I would say you should have that. Ideally, you would have, I&E's video series in front of you, like our ICND 1 or ICND 2 video series. And what I would recommend that you do is you read a chapter in the book, like chapter 1. As you're going through the chapter, create your flashcards on that. If there's anything in that chapter you can practice in a lab, like in Packet Tracer or our rack rentals, practice it. And then when you're done with chapter number 1, before you go on to the next chapter, check out our videos. And try to find some of our videos that line up with the topics in chapter number 1. Watch the videos. That might spark some additional things you want to create some flashcards on. And then go on to chapter number 2 and rinse and repeat. So read, create flashcards, watch videos that correlate to what you read, make sure you lab stuff up and practice it, and then go on to the next chapter and repeat that process. What other questions does anybody have? See, George, you just wrote something. So when you took your ICND 1, you encountered 2 labs. I guess you're talking about the simulations. When you took your ICND 2, you encountered 4 lab questions. Should I also expect 4 labs on my next ICND 2 exams? It's totally random. You're getting questions every time you take it. It's pulling random questions from that larger question pool. So sometimes you'll see the same questions, sometimes you won't. And as far as the simulations are concerned, it could be different. One time you take the ICND2, you might get 4 simulations. The next time you take it, you might get 1. So it's variable. Like I said, at most, I think you would see 5 at the absolute most as I've ever seen. But I have taken it sometimes and only gotten 1 simulation. So it could be anywhere in between there. Patrick writes, hi, after becoming a CCNA certified, should you freelance as a network engineer? Nope. You're on your way, but CCNA is absolutely not enough knowledge to be able to freelance as a network engineer. I would say in order to freelance as a network engineer, at minimum, you'd have to have a CCNP in routing and switching, ideally a CCIE, but CCNP minimum criteria and a minimum of 3 years of experience. So with those 2 things, NP and 3 years of networking experience, then you could probably start contracting yourself out as a network engineer. But ideally, you'd want to have a CCIE. And another question, should I study for the CCIE routing and switching or go through CCNA, CCNP, followed by CCIE? Good question. It's an interesting little fact that to get the middle certification, the CCNP, you have to have an active CCNA. In other words, you can take the CCNP exams. You can even pass the CCNP exams, but they won't give you a CCNP certification unless you have an active, not expired, CCNA certification. The same is not true of the CCIE. One could actually have no Cisco certifications at all and go straight to passing the CCIE written, the CCIE lab, and then you have your CCIE. There are no prerequisites for the CCIE. Now, of course, it's very hard to do that. So, to answer your question, that really depends on your level of existing network experience. If you're somebody that's been working in the field of computer networks and routing and switching for a good, 6+ years, and you look at the blueprint for the CCNA and you look at the blueprint for the CCNP, and you can confidently say, yeah, I pretty much know all that stuff. I've worked on that stuff for like the last 5 or 6 years. If that is you, then yeah, you can probably go right towards getting your CCIE. If that does not describe you, then I would start with your CCNA and work your way on up to getting your CCIE. What other questions does anybody have? Well, that seems to be it. So thank you everybody for watching, for tuning in today. For those of you that were thinking about getting into computer networking, were thinking about pursuing your CCNA, hopefully you have a much better idea now of what's entailed, how you should study, how you should pursue it, and what the exam is going to look like when you actually get around to taking it. I wish you all the best. And please keep in touch with me and let me know how you're doing. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out. And have a great weekend, everybody, and best of luck on your CCNA pursuits.